Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jacek Spendel. I'm president of Liberty International, and it's my pleasure and honor to start today's event. We'll be talking about immigration, about open borders. I have fantastic speakers invited to our event. I will introduce them. We will be also discussing a new product, intellectual product by Liberty International and EasyBusiness, who is our partner in this case, the International Work Migration Index. But at the beginning, let me tell you a bit more about the organizer and the host of this event, Liberty International. We are a pretty old organization, started in 1969. So being a libertarian and a very international organization, indeed working all over the world, we are in this narrow category the oldest organization. However, we are not big, but doing a lot of projects, and I will tell you more about them in a moment. So our mission is finding and expanding freedom in unfree world. We want to combine libertarian ideas, beautiful ideas of freedom, individual liberty, free markets, entrepreneurship. We want to combine them with practicality. We strongly believe that the world we live in is not just the world of big governments, regulations, and taxes. Yes, that's of course true, but not only. There are places where freedom flourishes, and there are areas that can make our lives better if we identify them, if we give proper information to people who are seeking them, who want to live freer lives. We can make this world a bit better. And this is our role, to be there, identify these areas, and help people all over the world, especially in less fortunate countries, to live freer lives. It is possible, and we are here to help with that. Liberty International has multiple projects running, but let me tell you a bit about them. The old one and our still flagship project, the Liberty International World Conference, or LIWC. We do it since 1982, when the first one happened in Zurich, Switzerland. And this year, we are happy to announce, I'm glad to see this graphic, the next Liberty International World Conference will take place in the beautiful city of Madrid in Spain, the capital of Spain, August 16 to 19. Our theme of the conference is prosperity and longevity through liberty, because you can really achieve these beautiful things and other wonderful things only through liberty, not through government. Well, we'll discuss this in Madrid. I encourage everyone to go to our website of this conference, liberty-intl/LIWC. There are scholarships available for students, for young people, and obviously different kinds of tickets for everyone else. And we expect many countries to be represented there, intellectuals, think tank leaders, entrepreneurs, our Liberty International worldwide family, basically. We have other trainings available at Liberty International. One of them is the one that I lead, and I'm very proud about it. It's called Project Arizona. It's a leadership program for young leaders from all over the world. And we are still looking for applications. Registrations are open until March 20th. So please make sure to check it out. It has its own website, projectarizona.us. This year it will happen in the fall, October 22nd, November 29th, and it's basically a combination of very top-notch education, volunteering, a lot of networking in one of the freest places in the world. And this is basically a place and project when you can really get very inspired, like me in the past, inspired about freedom, because freedom happens there on daily basis. There's multitude of organizations that advance freedom. We are friends with them. We do projects with them. So that's Project Arizona. I very much recommend looking it up. We have another online project that was born under COVID. COVID era was horrible for human liberty and most of all for health, for human health. But some innovations happened, and at Liberty International, the innovation we developed is an online course named Libertarian Solutions, very much in line with our mission, right? We try to talk and spread through real solutions about how to obtain more freedom in our lifetime. So this new course, Libertarian Solutions 3.0, has this slogan, how to share the libertarian message with just about anyone. Many fantastic speakers, and this LS 3.0 is already happening, but there will be more libertarian solutions in the future. And actually, you can still join Libertarian Solutions 3.0. It is possible. Just go with the link. I don't want to talk more about our projects, except one, which you will talk, my fantastic speakers, more about. Well, a few months ago, we made a big decision at Liberty International. We want to start a research division, and we started it under leadership of fantastic lady who is my friend and also alumna of Project Arizona. We should remember that, Kate Shapovalenko. Kate is from Ukraine, but she's now in the United States, where she's studying at the very prestigious university. Kate will obviously speak today at the event, but this first project in the research division, which is International Work Migration Index, would never start indeed without a support of good people who believe in what we do. And these people are not just scattered individuals. They donate money to organization that chose us and trusted in us. The organization name is Atlas Network. Atlas Network is a fantastic organization based in DC, doing important work to promote liberty, to promote projects advancing liberty of organizations all around the world. They in the membership is being shared by almost 500 organizations, or maybe over 500. We will hear in a moment, because we have a fantastic guest here who is vice president of Atlas Network, or also senior fellow at the DC-based Cato Institute, great advocate of freedom, and people who traveled so many countries that it's hard to count. Joining us from beautiful Thailand, Tom G. Palmer. Welcome, Tom.
Well, thank you very, very much, Jacek, and my thanks also to Kate and all the other people who put the work into this, to Liberty International and EasyBusiness, for providing this very important device to measure, and on the basis of accurate measurement, to compare and to evaluate the restrictions on work migration that are imposed by various states. And also for this opportunity to discuss it with an international audience. And providing this International Work Migration Index is a real service to humanity. Now, all of you who are tuned in are going to hear from a number of experts on the topic of work migration, including scholars I've known for some years and whom I admire for their dogged persistence in gathering and evaluating evidence and formulating hypotheses, and then fairly responding to criticisms from every direction. Now, there are, as Bryan Caplan has shown, trillion-dollar bills on the street, opportunities for enormous improvements in human well-being, if only we were to change the migration and work policies of states around the world. The places where we live have a great impact on how much we can contribute to the prosperity of other people, and thus how much we can advance our own well-being. In a sense, it's places that are poor, not people. Economist Lance Pritchett put it very succinctly. He said, and I quote, "Mostly in the world, there aren't poor people. There are people in poor places. When they move to other places voluntarily, they create more value for themselves and for others, most notably for those among whom they now reside and work." But the case for open borders, for freedom of migration, in my opinion, goes beyond the purely utilitarian benefits of freedom of movement and work, which are indeed immense. It encompasses fundamental values: justice, dignity, fairness, and human agency. Enslavement of people is now widely regarded as repugnant and contrary to those values I just listed. But for thousands of years, that was not considered to be the case. Slavery existed and was defended. The world was changed when brave people stood up against enslavement and argued and fought for the rights of all to their freedom. One of those great champions of liberty was a man who was born a slave, Frederick Douglass, but who fought to secure his own liberty and the liberty of millions of others. In 1869, Frederick Douglass turned his formidable intellect to the issue of freedom of movement. I'd like to quote at some length what he said on this. He said, "There are such things in the world as human rights. They rest upon no conventional foundation, but are external, universal, and indestructible. Among these is the right of locomotion, the right of migration, the right which belongs to no particular race, but belongs alike to all and to all alike. It is the right you assert by staying here, and your fathers asserted by coming here. It is this great right that I assert for the Chinese and Japanese." And at that time, there were movements to exclude Chinese and Japanese people from the United States. "And for all other varieties of men equally with yourselves, now and forever. I know of no rights of race that are superior to the rights of humanity. And when there is a supposed conflict between human and national rights, it is safe to go to the side of humanity." Close quote. So the right to freedom of locomotion and the right to migration, he argued, is fundamental. Others are committing an injustice when they stop you from moving to another country where you would rather live and work. But there's also a rarely mentioned set of rights involved as well. Not only the rights of the migrants, but also the rights of people in a country that receives migrants to cooperate with them. So that includes consumers, employers, co-workers, and more. The right of people in whatever country you're in to cooperate with people from other countries is also a right that is violated by restrictions on freedom of movement and the freedom to work. Now, many people respond by saying, well, your country is like your house. You don't have to let everyone into your house. Well, in some ways, your country is like your house. Really, you live there. So in that sense, they're comparable or similar. But in other ways, they are not similar because your country includes the houses of other people. And it's not my business to dictate how other people live in their houses, how they manage their businesses, what people do there, or, and here's the important point for this topic, with whom they choose to cooperate, to work together, to employ, or to work for. Now, let me turn then to the index that is being presented today. It's quite important to develop objective measurements that can be compared from one country to another. A number of them come immediately to mind. The Ease of Doing Business report, which unfortunately is going out of business, but we hope will be resurrected by Dr. Simeon Jankov in the near future. The Economic Freedom of the World report of the Fraser Institute of Canada, and the reports of groups such as Freedom House and others. They help us to measure, to study, to understand, to compare, to evaluate, and to improve policies. Now, these indices work much better when people pay attention to the details, when they study them, and when they criticize them. Such an index can and should be criticized and improved through that active criticism. And I'm confident that this one will be. And as it improves, that it will help to prepare the world, that prepare the way for a world of greater liberty and justice and peace and prosperity. The right to locomotion, the right to migrate, the right to cooperate freely with others, which we use shorthand, the right to work. That's what's at stake. And with those rights, when they are recognized, come enormous benefits, as you will learn from the presenters to come. So I'd like to welcome everyone to this discussion and also to thank those who did so much work to prepare this index for us to be able to actually compare with objective measurements the policies in different countries that restrict or facilitate people being able to move, to work, to cooperate, and to add value. So congratulations to Liberty International and to EasyBusiness. I'll turn it back over to you, Jacek, for the program to begin.
Thank you very much, Tom. A lot of very important remarks. Freedom of locomotion, freedom of starting new life wherever someone wants is essential for freedom, for prosperity. And our other speakers will make other points, I'm sure, also very valuable for that. Saying that, I want to open up now a panel on the freedom to migrate. We'll have a number of fantastic speakers, and let me introduce Professor Bryan Caplan, who is probably the best advocate and researcher in this topic. He's an author of a book on open borders, which is a best-selling book. I come from Poland, and this book is very popular in my country, published by Polish Mises Institute very recently. Professor Caplan is an economist based at the George Mason University in Virginia in the United States. He's also fellow at research fellow at Mercatus Center, also in Virginia. Both of these institutions, the university and Mercatus Center, have tremendous impact on research towards the impact of free markets and all different kinds of implications of free markets all over the world. So Professor Caplan will tell us more about his insights, also a bit about our index. So Bryan, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. I've been asked to talk a little bit about my work in open borders, and yes, it has been translated into Polish, Czech, and Hungarian. So I had a great tour of Eastern Europe about a year ago. So why don't we get started? Let's see here. Yes. Let's see here. Okay. Nice. Technical issue. Okay. All right. And by the way, so let me thank the organizers very much for doing this. And yes, having an index, it might seem like it's just summarizing things that people know, but it gets attention and it gets countries saying, why can't we be better in this index? So someone whose job it is policy, it's very natural for them, once you are measuring it, for them to be sort of looking around and saying, how can we do better? All right. Okay, very good. All right, yes. So this is based upon my nonfiction graphic novel, Open Borders. Many people wonder, why did you do it this way? A few reasons. One is I actually wanted people to read it. And I noticed that regular books often do not get read. Sometimes don't get opened and rarely get completed. I wanted to do something that was more entertaining. Also, I wanted to reach a much broader audience. Most of my books, I always try to write things that will reach a broader audience, but usually I stop at college students. Here, my 5-year-old daughter was reading the book as I was writing it, so I felt like I had something. And I think also, there is the saying of a picture is worth 1,000 words if you choose it correctly. And I think I was just able to convey a lot more information in a short amount of time with this format. All right. So just to get started, the wealth of freedom, right? Basic fact, most people on earth cannot live or work in the first world without government permission. And this permission is almost impossible to obtain. It's not like you just get in line and then you wait 45 minutes and then you get to the front of the line and get in. Most people would have to wait a lifetime. The rules are just too strict for them to qualify. Now, in economics, we have standard models of international trade. And what they imply is that this regulation has enormous deadweight costs, which means that it causes great harm without any corresponding benefit. There's a huge price wedge where you make the price of labor in different countries very different, and implies something like a 50% reduction in gross world product from all this regulation, or alternately, an opportunity to double the production of the world through deregulation. So why not? Well, the best critics will accept the standard government presumption against government regulation of immigration and then try to surmount it. There are people who just say, like, I don't see the problem, or like Tom was mentioning, say, well, the country is like a house. And if you really took that seriously, it is a totalitarian position. You don't have the right to open up a newspaper in my house. Therefore, you don't have the right to open up a newspaper in a country without government permission. You don't have the right to open up a church in my house without my permission, so you have to have government permission for your church. You don't have the right to open up a store inside of my house without my permission. Therefore, no business should be allowed without government permission. Right? It is a very totalitarian view to think that the right to do these things belongs to the government rather than the property owner. But the best critics will say, all right, fine. It's generally a very bad idea for government to do these kinds of things. But in this case, however, it actually is a good idea. The three main arguments that people have made: first of all, fiscal burden; second of all, cultural harm; and third, political externalities or political harm. The main hurdle for all these arguments is this: the estimated cost of the immigration restrictions is huge. So if you're going to try to make an exception, you got to find some comparably huge benefits of regulation. All right, over there is Milton Friedman. I did get the pleasure of meeting him once. I bet Tom met him like 20 times. But Milton Friedman had a famous line where he said, you cannot have free immigration and a welfare state. The simple story here, look, it is true that the American welfare state at least pays more for idleness than many countries pay for work. The same is true in some European countries, maybe all European countries. And therefore, immigrants come to abuse the system. Now, undeniably, there are some people that do come to abuse the system. But it's the question of how many and how severely, and does this justify taking away the freedom for a vastly larger number of people? Well, it depends upon how bad the abuse is. All right, key fact about the U.S. welfare state and the welfare state of every known country, actually, is most of the money goes to the old, not the poor. And immigrants tend to be young, even if they are poor. All right, now the upshot is that there's almost no serious researcher who finds a big negative fiscal effect of immigration. There are people who do find moderate negative fiscal effects. People find basically zero positive effects. And obviously, it's going to vary by country. Sweden is probably going to be considerably worse than the U.S. In the book, I talk about the National Academy of Science estimates for the U.S., which look not perfect, but pretty good. Now, I know that just listening to someone read a slide over the course of a minute or two is not very convincing on this. To really believe it, I'd say you might have to go through the numbers yourself. And I know almost no one will ever do that. It's just too boring. But I do want to give you an idea about why these numbers aren't absurd. How could it be that immigrants are not a big fiscal burden, right? And a lot of the answers, a lot of government spending is what we call non-rival. Immigrant, which means that the cost of the government service does not depend upon the population of the country that is enjoying it. All right, so immigrants help spread the cost of national defense. If we had a large baby boom, millions of new babies, no one would say we need a bigger military to defend the babies, right? But rather, those babies would grow to be taxpayers who would spread the burden of the national defense among a large number of people. Same thing goes for debt service. If you already are paying interest on national debt, if you can get your population bigger, and even if they're only paying a small amount, that is still spreading the service among a larger number of people. All right, then there is the question of protecting American culture. Of course, it could be Polish culture or Czech culture or Slovakian culture or Hungarian culture. This is a very common complaint that immigrants will not learn the native language. They don't fit in. So here I talk a lot about what is going on in the United States, although I think the results will be similar in other countries. Maybe worse in, for example, France, but worse does not mean disastrous. It's very important to keep a sense of proportion. All right, so we can see is that the group that is widely perceived as not learning English in the US, when we actually measure over 90% of second-generation Mexicans speak fluent English, the real story is that first-generation immigrants who come in later adulthood, they generally do not acquire fluency, and they never have. There's never been a period in US history or really any country where it's common for 30-year-old people to move to your country and learn to speak your language without an accent because it's so hard. But it doesn't mean that their kids don't learn to speak the language fluently. All right, now that's just one measure of culture, I know. There are a lot of other measures. I'm pressed for time. I have the easy offer of, read my book, and then everything will be completely clear. But that would be better. Just to step back and make a general point, there are a lot of people on the internet who do not like me. And one of the things they say about me is Bryan is so stupid that he believes in magic dirt. Magic dirt. And what is magic dirt? Well, magic dirt is supposed to be that an illiterate Afghan goat herder can get off a plane in the US, his foot will touch the soil, and then suddenly he'll be transformed into a investment banker who speaks fluent English. So what I say in the book is I don't believe in magic dirt, not true, but I'm willing to endorse something I call magic culture, which says two things. One a little bit magical and the other one highly magical. The first part of magic culture is that we can take that illiterate Afghan goat herder, have him land in the United States, and in a week he can become a productive member of our society. How? Probably by washing dishes in an Afghan restaurant. But that's an important job. That job needs to be done. Restaurants are important. Dishes have to be washed. So that illiterate Afghan goat herder, even though he is highly unfamiliar with our culture, he can assimilate enough quickly to be a productive member of society. The real magic part is when you look at that guy's kids, who will in fact assimilate almost entirely. Last point here, the power of pre-assimilation. 100 years ago, it was very uncommon for immigrants from non-English speaking countries to speak English when they arrived in the United States, to know what the modern economy was like. If you're coming from Sicily, you might not even know electricity, right? But in the modern world, we have something called pre-assimilation. Due to modern transportation and communication, there are billions of people who have not ever lived in the first world, but nevertheless know what it is like. So assimilation is actually in many ways easier than ever now because people assimilate before they arrive. I'm guessing that many viewers here have never lived permanently in an English-speaking country, and yet you're listening to me in English. How is that possible? Through pre-assimilation. Then last, protecting liberty. All right, so obviously this is a freedom-loving audience that we were talking to. When I talk to freedom-loving audiences, they'll often say, all right, look, I'm conflicted. Because on the one hand, I want to say yes to people that want to move to freedom and prosperity. But on the other hand, we have to be realistic. Immigrants come from statist countries. And if we let them come here, they'll get to vote. And if they get to vote, then they are going to vote against freedom, right? That's what's worrying me. So yes, in the book, I describe this as the master plan, which is step 1, flee hellhole of birth. Step 2, get first world citizenship. Step 3, vote for the hellhole party. And then 4, repeat after you have ruined the country and you want to get out. All right. Now, is there any truth to this? Well, I have actually looked at the data on public opinion of immigrants. The story is not completely wrong, but it's important to keep a sense of perspective. There can be a little bit of truth to a story, and yet it can still be a flimsy basis for any kind of drastic action. All right, there can be a friend at a party who's talking too loud. Someone says, he's talking so loud, he's ruining the party for everyone. And you say, well, he's talking a little loud. I don't think he's ruining the party for anyone, much less anyone. All right, that's where I come down. All right, so in the data in the US, we'll see non-natives are more socially conservative and economically liberal, but the difference is marginal except for the least educated immigrants. Secondly, we see that non-natives have low turnout, and that's especially true for the least educated. And then finally, there is some fascinating evidence that immigrants actually reduce native support for the welfare state because people resent helping out groups. Now, this causes a lot of inner conflict among left-wing supporters of more open immigration, because on the one hand, they like the immigration, on the other hand, they like the welfare state, and to learn that if you let in immigrants, it's going to undermine support for the welfare state makes them feel bad, right? And given their positions, that makes sense. On the other hand, though, for people that really care about human freedom, small government, individual rights, the free market, this is not a case of conflict. It's a case of harmony. Right? It's saying we can let in more immigrants. We can go and reduce support for the welfare state at the same time. That sounds great. Now, again, it's important to remember this is not a radical effect. The usual view among people who work on this is that the immigrants have not actually shrunk the welfare state anywhere. They have just stopped it from being bigger than it otherwise would. But again, if you are concerned about the effect of immigrants on the welfare state, if you're worried that they're going to make it bigger, the net effect seems to be the other way around. All right. So I'm happy to let's see. So we don't really have a Q&A part, do we? So, well, in that case, I'll just leave it at that.
We do.
So we do or do not have Q&A?
We do have Q&A, but a bit later after a few speakers. But
okay,
we hope
very good.
You stay with us, Bryan.
Thank you very much. And yes, you can read the book in Polish, Polish, Czech, /Slovak, Hungarian, and of course in English. And now Japanese. It's in Japanese now.
Wonderful. Very powerful arguments, powerful book. I also encourage to get the book, to purchase the book, to read it. And this year, we can also mention this, Bryan, that there will be a book authored by you, published by Cato Institute, Build, Baby, Build, the Science and Ethics of Housing. Very important topic as well. And, more immigration, more unrestricted housing.
Yes.
These are very...
Probably at the end of the year, but yes, if your country doesn't allow any housing, it doesn't matter that much if immigrants can come. Where are they going to live? You've got to build places for people to live, and the free market is really eager to do that as soon as they can get that piece of paper from the government saying you're allowed to perform this vital service.
Yes, so we're very much looking forward this new book, and hopefully discussion on housing, as we know that there's a lot of people, especially on the left, but some on the right, basically collectivists, who want to restrict not just immigration, but also housing and many other important ways people flourish. Our next speaker is Professor Per Bylund. Per is professor at Oklahoma State University. He's also a colleague for me because we are together on the board of Liberty International. Additionally, Per is a senior fellow at Mises Institute. He published 3 full-length books, with the latest, How to Think About the Economy, a primer. Very, very interesting. And I want to use this opportunity to spread this information that at Liberty International, we have this new project named Socratic Reading Circles. And after the first book that we chose, which was Jonathan Gullible, Adventures of Jonathan Gullible by Ken Schooland, we are now discussing Per's new book, How to Think About the Economy. So Per is also a mentor for this project that we mentioned here the most, the International Work Migration Index. Per, tell us more why Liberty International decided to launch this project in the first place.
Yes, thanks, Jacek. And thanks to Tom and Bryan for really good introductions to the topic as well. For me, I think this project really captures what Liberty International is about. It draws from our strengths and it shows where we want to go and what we want to do. And there are really three parts to it, I would say. One is research, that we want to do research and uncover what is possible in the world and what the world looks like, figure out where liberties are hindered and burdened as much as they are, but to what extent as well, because there are different burdens to liberty in different countries and in different regions, different continents, and so forth. So research is one, and of course, as a researcher, this is close to my own interests personally. But I think for Liberty International, it's also very important to talk about the practice. And we want to use this index to provide information to people who want to seek opportunity in other countries, who are considering the possibility of going somewhere else to make a better life for themselves. Tom mentioned, and this is very true, that it's not really people that are poor, it's places that are poor. So if you are born in a poor area, whether it's a poor country or a poor state in the US, say, or a poor part of the city, you are going to have a much better chance at escaping poverty if you go somewhere else. So if you leave that part of town, or if you leave that country and go somewhere else where people are more prosperous, and you adapt to that culture and you contribute to that economy, you're going to find it much, much easier to get yourself out of poverty. And what we're doing with this index is providing the tools for people in practice to figure out how they can go somewhere else and what it takes to go somewhere else. So in this index, we're looking at both the time necessary to go somewhere, how much time it takes from basically taking the decision to actually moving to another country and looking and establishing yourself there. So in terms of days and months and years, how long will it take typically? And also the cost, because very often there are regulations and there are fees and things like that. Very often governments don't really mind profiting off of foreigners because they don't have power over foreigners, but they also don't have any duties or responsibilities to foreigners. So it can be a very costly process. So we're looking at both the sort of dollar expense or the money expense and the time it takes. So that's the practice part. We want to empower people to move from wherever they are to a place where they think that they can make a better life for themselves and their family. And this, of course, also serves the third purpose, which is to uncover and also provide guidance for improving and changing policy. And this is very important, of course, because if we don't know what the rules are or how burdensome they are or how much they hinder people from pursuing their best lives, we also cannot update and we also cannot reform those policies. So those are the three big parts, big perspectives, really, that Liberty International, to me, combine worldwide. And as Jacek mentioned before, Liberty International is the oldest worldwide libertarian organization. I think we're on all continents except Antarctica, maybe. But other than that, we are everywhere, pretty much. And we want to do research to help people. We want to empower people to actually seek liberty and find liberty. And we want to help people to also improve their liberty and grow liberty at home through policy reforms, or if necessary, then just simply escaping the policies that are too stifling and are too burdensome on people and maybe keep them in poverty, which is very often the case. So the economic implications of this index then are really that we're of course supporting, but also empowering people to take advantage of the global division of labor and specialize and position themselves in those places where they can do most good for others. Because as we know, as libertarians and also as free market economists, we know that the economy works best unencumbered and unhindered. That's the market economy allocates resources to where they do most good. And of course, what you do in the economy is that you make the best life for yourself and benefit the most the more you serve others. And it could very well be, and very often for people who migrate for work, like I did myself from Sweden to the US, it could very well be that the best way to serve others and thereby serve yourself is to place yourself in a different location, in a different city, in a different region, in a different country, or a different continent, perhaps. All of those things. So migration is a very important way for us to flourish as people. And Tom mentioned this before too, that the locomotion or the ability to associate with whomever you like, as long as they're okay with it, to live with it wherever you like, in terms of the geography and things like that, are basic human freedoms. Of course, still respecting property rights and things like that, but still you have the right to pursue your own happiness. And on an individual level, part of that is necessarily to move wherever you like. And very often, the strange thing with this sort of debate is that people support that everybody should, of course, have the right to move wherever they like within their country. But for some reason, as soon as you get to the country's borders, that right ceases. For some reason, you cannot move across that invisible line, unless you're within, say, a super state like the European Union or the United States, which is a similar phenomenon, right? Where you have states and you live in one state and you can move to another state, no problem. So you can move from Minnesota in the north to Texas in the south. That's not an issue. But if you move from Minnesota just across the border to Canada, which is much shorter distance, that might not be easy. That might be a very hard, even very expensive. And why should not Minnesotans be able to seek their best lives and opportunity just across the border, which just might be miles, when they can go to Texas, which is hundreds of miles? It doesn't make any sense. Of course, people have that freedom. I think the country's perspective is also important, because by allowing migration into your country, you're allowing people who have a lot of energy, who have a lot of willingness to work hard and start businesses, have different perspectives and bring new knowledge, even though they might need to learn to fit into the new culture, but they bring a new perspective, and they thereby contribute to the country's culture and the economy. And very often, I don't think anyone really minds that we have all these kinds of restaurants in most countries. You have Thai food and Chinese food and Indian food, and you have maybe not Swedish food, but Swedish meatballs should be. There should be a restaurant in every city, I think, with Swedish meatballs. We don't mind these different types of food. Well, these different kinds of food are often brought by people from those countries who are used to cooking these different dishes, and we enjoy these new types of combining flavors and these new types of seasonings and things like that. And it's an interesting experience, and we enjoy it. Now, why should we not allow this in other things than food? Of course we should. We should allow people to seek opportunities wherever they like and contribute to our countries. If we really love our country and want to stay in our country, that's perfectly fine. Most people do. But we should also embrace the opportunity to have others contribute to our country. And of course, having migration also means not only what we're doing in this index, uncovering how policies are different, but it pushes, it creates institutional competition. It creates pressures on policymakers by people simply moving to where they find policies better, where they find policies most supportive for whatever that life they're seeking. So people will, at least on the margin, leave countries or regions or cities where the policies are too restrictive, to countries, regions, or cities where policies are less restrictive from whatever perspective they're coming and whatever they want to try to pursue. And we see this recently within the United States, that people are leaving some states where, in this case, the pandemic policies were too harsh, or at least we think that's why they're leaving, and it seems to be the case. And they're leaving 2 states where they were more open. So if people appreciate that, they should definitely do that. Or they can go the other way around, of course, too. That's not what we're seeing right now. But they should be able to seek whatever institutional setting and whatever regulatory framework they wish and choose the better one. And that's also one of the reasons why, it's at least one of the theories, why Europe has been so successful over the past few hundred years, because there have been plenty of small states, small countries, who have offered different institutional and regulatory frameworks, and people have moved between them. So there has been a lot of pressure on policymakers to actually provide policies that people like, that people prefer, because people show this by moving from one place to the next and becoming, therefore, taxpayers in the place they're moving to. And of course, that also means they're withdrawing taxes from the place they're leaving. So I think this index, like I said, captures what Liberty International is about. It's about international, global freedom, of course, but it's supposed to be a practical freedom, a freedom where every individual can pursue their best life. That's what freedom is about. And it doesn't really matter what country you're in, you should still have the opportunity, and you should still have the liberty to do what you can do best and serve others, of course, but of course, improve your situation and your family, and you should have that power. So I think the Work Migration Index empowers people, it empowers policymakers who want to change and reform policies that are too restrictive on people. And I think that's where we can do a lot of good with this index. And of course, what we are releasing today is a first step. So we're just focusing on a few countries. And the point is with this index is to continue to expand it step by step in different stages, so we can cover the whole world and create a guide for people to figure out where they can move to and where they can do most good in terms of pushing for policy change.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Per. You made me think about this Swedish meatballs. I never tried them. I think they must be delicious. I know they are always in Ikea, and Ikea is all over the world, right? Because politicians understood that freedom to trade is something good. At least not all of them, that's true, but many of them understand that it's good to have this IKEA store in their countries. But the next step is to understand that to have a Swedish person or Ukrainian or whatever nation is also actually not bad, but rather beneficial. And they can bring new cuisine, new taste for the life of different nations. Thank you so much for your great points, Per. Now I want to switch to our colleagues, friends from Ukraine. And EasyBusiness is a very important partner of this project. They provided basically the research capacity. I want to introduce here Dmytro Lyvch, who is CEO of EasyBusiness, based in the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv. He has more than 8 years of professional experience in public policy, sustainable development, budgetary process, regional development. He is a very experienced think tank leader who did also numerous of Atlas Network trainings. I know that. One of them with my wife back in Bratislava many years ago. She has very good memories. And the second person from Ukraine, although temporarily in the United States because she's doing this important master studies in Pennsylvania, Kate Shapovalenko, who is head of research division at Liberty International. She's also connected professionally with EasyBusiness. She's alumna of Project Arizona, and most importantly, she has long experience, now over 5 years, in public policy and economic analysis. And I should mention that Kate was the leading person in the very beginning of this project, when we just discussed what do we want to achieve, how do we want to achieve. Her insights, her ideas laid a foundation for what we are enjoying now, which is the ready pilot of the index. So Kate and Dmytro will tell us more about this index, and maybe more about Ukraine, the country they come from, the country that suffers from the horrible invasion of Russian Federation, illegal invasion that puts the country in a very tough spot. It's people who suffer, who need to migrate more than ever, and this is forced migration in this case. I'm happy to switch the voice to Dmytro and Kate.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jacek, for the introduction. It's a great honor to be here and present the research that we actually worked on together with Liberty International and with the generous support of our partner organization Atlas Network. And you made a very good introduction, to be honest, because Ukraine is now actually in a full-scale war with an aggressor state, and we have totally different values, because Ukrainians actually stand for freedom and democratic values, and prove that we are part of the civilized world and democratic and free society. And thus, those challenges that we are facing right now, they are not only on the battlefield; they are also on the economic front. And I would start my speech with providing you with few facts that are related to Ukraine's recovery and modernization efforts, because I truly believe that the war will be over soon with the victory of Ukraine, and then we will need to put all our efforts of the democratic states of the world to Ukraine's recovery and modernization. And according to different estimates of different organizations like the World Bank Group, IMF, the government of Ukraine, the need for Ukraine's recovery would be huge. And it amounts for around $350 billion according to the World Bank Group, and $750 billion according to the National Recovery Council of Ukraine. But the recovery is not only about the money and financial support. It's first and foremost about the people who will be actually driving forces for this recovery. And we do understand that currently 8 million of Ukrainians are forced migrants, forced refugees to mostly European states. We do understand that some of them are already made decision to stay and remain abroad. And we do understand that comparing those numbers that I mentioned before with the GDP dynamics of Ukraine and also gross capital formation that was around $50 billion, the challenge is huge, and thus we need to allocate resources, and thus we need to understand what are the policy implications should be done in order to stimulate the economic growth in the upcoming future, and in order to bring the best possible talent into Ukraine's recovery. We do understand that refugees, migration, declining population, and other issues may imply a labor force shortage in the upcoming future, given Ukraine strives to reach its economic growth targets. And actually, there are many ways to support Ukraine's recovery, and one of them is actually liberalization of labor markets and liberalization of migration policies. And that is why EasyBusiness partnered up with Liberty International and supported by Atlas Network. We're very much interested in this kind of a project, in this kind of endeavor, and started actively engaged in the index development just to understand how much do migrants actually spend in terms of their time and monetary costs throughout the work migration process, in order to understand how can we better assist the needs of Ukraine's recovery in terms of opening the borders and in terms of bringing the best possible talent on the market to Ukraine's recovery. And actually, we already obtained results of the study that may be practical, that may have practical implication in government decisions, and also some kind of further researches. And currently we are working on the development of practical recommendations out of this International Work Migration Index. And I'm very delighted to share this floor with my colleague Kateryna Shapovalenko, who will present in more details the methodology on how the index was created and the key research insights that will guide the further development of this fantastic International Work Migration Index. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Dmytro. Let me share my slides. So. Yes, hello everyone. Today finally we will be presenting the results and methodology for calculation of International Work Migration Index. And let me start with a briefly overview how we come up with this index and what were the steps of calculating the index. So first, we selected 4 types of migrants for whom we will be calculating time and money needed to migrate to a particular country. So we had 4 groups of migrants. We calculated everything for skilled migrant, unskilled migrant, skilled migrant who are migrating with a kid, and then a couple. For each type of these groups of migrants, for each group of this migrant, we calculated, we listed all possible steps that the person will need to get to a particular country. So the long list is very long. So we have steps to find a job, to obtain the work permit, apply for a visa, get medical insurance, find accommodation, and so on. And so for each of these steps, we try to calculate how much time needed to organize everything and how much money needed and how much money does it take to get all possible needed documents and procedures. A little bit more about how we calculated the costs. So we have two types of costs. We have time costs and monetary costs. About time costs, we have direct and indirect. About direct costs, it's like direct money needed for a person to search up information about the particular procedure, travel to the agency, make a payment, and submit all needed documents. About indirect time costs, it's something that the person just shall have to wait from the public institution about particular action or decision. About monetary costs, we also have direct and indirect. Direct is actually fees that the person has to pay to obtain a potential document or run through a particular procedure, whereas indirect cost is something when the person is just like lost opportunity cost, when the person is just like doing all these bureaucratic things and steps instead of working on a more productive activity. We try to have and receive different international perspective on the costs and time. For that, we selected 3 pilot countries. So we have Poland, Canada, and Ukraine. And for each of these countries, we're calculating time and costs needed. Let me go next to present the results. So on the left-hand side, we have different destinations countries. As I said, we have Ukraine, Poland, and Canada. Then we have different groups of work migrants. So we have Polish who is traveling to Ukraine, and he's a skilled worker. And then we estimate what's the monetary cost and time cost for this person, and so on. We list like this time and cost for all possible migrants. As a result, what we see that in case of Ukraine offers it is less time consuming to get all possible work permits if the person is traveling from Poland or Canada. But if we, for example, look at the case of Canada, we see that the monetary costs and time costs are much higher. At the same time, we try to estimate 2 scenarios, optimistic scenario and pessimistic scenario. Optimistic scenario is actually everything which the government promises It's a maximum time of procedures according to government legislative documents that this procedure will take 3 months. But then we also talked with migrants who actually had all those procedures, and we asked them how much time it actually takes. And we estimated that this pessimistic scenario is actually what it takes in the reality, and we see a huge gap between what the government actually promises and lists at the maximum time compared what it actually takes in the real life. And finally, we also wanted to compare and list different indicators in the same graph. So we listed cost for migration, which is a yellow line. We have minimum and maximum cost for migration. Then we have annual living expenses. So what the person expects to spend in the country once he or she arrives to this country. And finally, annual salary. So this is the benefit for the person after the person undergo after all possible bureaucratic procedures. And what we see that Ukraine offers a pretty good and one of the best actually ratio in terms of costs and benefits after the migration. On the right-hand side, we see the situation and digit figures for Canada. We see that although the ratio is a little bit lower, the absolute values of the person can actually earn in the country is much higher. So this allows us to compare this index overall, allow us to compare situation across different countries for different types of migrants. And as we said, this is a pilot project. We just tested this methodology and come up with a methodology just for 3 countries. And our next idea and our next goals is to expand the index and make it truly international, trying to cover as many countries as possible. This is our aspiration. So we really welcome international partnerships, different think tanks who really want to partner for this initiative and calculate their information for their country to enable and make more data-driven policy decision on their end. We all welcome the partnerships. Yeah, this is briefly from my side.
Great, thank you so much, Kate, and thank you, Dmytro, for your presentations. And the findings are quite extraordinary that within these 3 countries, Poland, Canada, and Ukraine, it is the Ukraine being far the most open and easy to migrate country for workers. We know that currently under this war circumstances, the work migration will not happen because the country is in danger. People migrate for other purposes. But after the war, hopefully, if Ukraine continues and maybe even strengthens its classical liberal path, and I know that EasyBusiness has a lot to do with this. Big kudos for you guys. I know you have a big impact on the president and his party. Continue with this. Then Ukraine could really become an exemplary country for freedom and especially the migration freedom. Keeping our fingers for that, because we need that kind of examples. That not many of them around the world. World is getting more and more regulated, more and more taxed. So I talked about this recently with my family members. Will Ukraine keep its relatively liberal solutions in various areas? And we were a little bit worried that it may have to do with the rebuilding, because if there is a perspective of big money being invested by large multinational communities and big countries that are same time big governments, they may say, we'll give you the money, we'll rebuild you, but stop your 2% income tax. We don't like it. We don't want to. We don't want our people to move to your country because of this low tax scheme that you're having. And I very much hope that this is just unfunded worriness. But what do you think about it? Maybe if I can ask this little question, Dmytro or Kate, do you think that kind of discussions may happen that, hey, we give you money to rebuild Ukraine, but stop this laissez-faire policies, stop this 2% taxes, stop this easy migration and so on and so forth? What do you think?
I think that the liberalization should continue because we managed to pass a necessary legislation to open up the free farmland market in Ukraine, for example. The privatization reform has been happening so far. The small privatization and the large privatization is moving. We do understand that there may be some regulations because of the wartime, and this is fair enough in the country that is now in the full-scale war with the aggressor state. But after the war is ended, I think that we will be on the track to the further liberalization, because it's also about the attractiveness of our country to both domestic investment and foreign direct investment. And the business enabling environment is a key, because investors who are coming to the country, they typically look at risks and potential incomes. And if you're talking about incomes, it's also about the cost and revenues. And you can increase your revenues by opening borders in order to get better access to markets, and you can decrease your costs as a company by actually benefiting from reduced bureaucracy and also reduced regulations that usually take some time. So Ukraine should be in the center of the development of the economy of the European continent, I would say, after the war is ended. And recovery is not only about grants and loans. They should be at first. It's also about the private capital investment and the work of free markets. And we actually analyzed 26 case studies of post-war and post-disaster recovery in many countries in 20th century and 21st century. And we do understand that at least 30 to 40% of the financing that is going for recovery purposes goes from private sector companies. And for those private sector companies to enter Ukraine's market, there needs to be at first security guarantees in order to reduce the risk. And the second, the business enabling environment should be competitive enough with other geographic locations in order to place those investments and also create GDP. And if we are talking about talents, it is very important to create this kind of collective know-how for those people who will migrate to Ukraine after we win the war, to create necessary conditions for them to create added value in Ukraine and increase the productivity, because this is another key to success for the country. And I think that the work that we've done together on this International Work Migration Index will help us to improve necessary regulations in order to make it more free and in order to liberalize the markets and guide post-war reconstruction and recovery and modernization processes in Ukraine, because this is very important not only for Ukraine but the whole democratic world.
Yes, thank you so much, Dmytro. We keep our fingers crossed for these classical liberal reforms, not just to stay but to continue, because there's a lot to be done. And the topic that you mentioned, how Ukraine will be rebuilt after the war, what kind of principles will be laid down for the recovery process. This can be a topic for another discussion, and we should have it. And thank you so much for doing this important work. Now I would like to introduce a guest, actually, but very important guest, who is a migrant herself. And this is Fresh Migration. She's from Ukraine, and she also took part in our research project. She was interviewed by our researchers. This is Kateryna Zinovska. Well, Kateryna, welcome. Kateryna is joining. Wonderful. She's joining us from beautiful city of Toronto, Canada, where she moved in April 2022. So I believe it was forced because of the war circumstance. She's a business analyst, originally from Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. And I would like to ask you, Kateryna, about your experience of immigration and maybe some key takeaways after, well, almost a year since you left your country, Ukraine.
Thanks so much. And thanks to all organizers and panelists. I'm very honored to be here today and talk about my experience with work migration to Canada. I'd like to say that I was thrilled to be involved in the International Work Migration Index project as an expert immigrant. It was an excellent opportunity to share my experience and knowledge about the process of migration to Canada. And it was thrilling to be involved in this project and help shape the view on the work migration to Canada. Circling back on the migration, as some of you may know, migrating to Canada for work actually takes time, money, and a lot of preparation, pretty much like many other developed countries in the world. Today, I would like to share some important lessons that I learned within this process. So first, let me start by saying that it has been, as you said, almost a year since I moved to Canada. And the reason for my migration was a job transfer from my employer in Ukraine to the Canadian branch amid Russian invasion of Ukraine. It has been a smooth experience for me. As per my observation, Canada requires a good job, good English, and open mentality for successful integration. And unfortunately, it may be challenging for some other people. The process for me also was simplified as Canada introduced immigration measures like emergency measures for work authorization of Ukrainians who are fleeing war. And this brings me to the second point, that Canada is an immigrant-friendly country and has a lot of immigration opportunities provided by the government. However, Canadian immigration is not as easy as compared to other European countries like Poland or Ukraine. It requires a lot of preparation work, especially for work migration. For example, Canadian employers on a regular basis have to prove to the government of Canada that they were unsuccessful in hiring the right candidate within Canada. Thus, they need you as a worker. That's why, as you may imagine, the process of work authorization prior to landing to Canada may take a long time and eventually may even result in the refusal. Thirdly, new work immigrants to Canada often experience cultural struggle within adjusting to Canadian workplace culture. Canada places a strong emphasis on collaboration and teamwork, and newcomers may find it challenging to adapt to this approach if they come from a culture that emphasizes individual achievement. For example, for me, it was also a challenge as I come from Ukraine, where you kind of have to show your skills and try to overcome your competitive colleagues and everything. Here, it's a bit another approach. And additionally, there may be also difference in the workplace norms and expectations, such as dress codes, work hours, communication styles. New work migrants may also face challenges with adapting to Canadian social norms and customs. For example, they may be unfamiliar with Canadian traditions or etiquette. They may also find this being the reason to find it difficult to establish social connections, as building relationships will take time and effort as the newcomer here. Finally, I would like to conclude by saying that work migration to Canada is a challenging process, but it's also a great opportunity for people who are looking for a new and unique professional experience. Canada is a beautiful country that offers excellent job opportunities and an excellent standard of living. And if you're planning to migrate to Canada for work, it is essential to start preparing early and take this initial preparation step very seriously. Cultural struggles are a common experience for new work migrants to Canada. However, with time and effort, they can learn to navigate these challenges and build a successful and fulfilling life in their new temporary or maybe even permanent home. And I hope that my experience and knowledge provided some insight into work migration to Canada. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kateryna. We are happy that you found a new home, basically, in Toronto, and that your career can continue, can grow in the new circumstances. And we just hope that that in the future, whatever you choose, stay in Canada or come back to Ukraine, will not be determined by war, right? It'll be just determined by your life choices, freely made. And thank you for taking important part in our research project. That matters a lot. We hope to grow it in the near future. So by saying that, I want to open the Q&A session. And well, most of the questions are not are not linked to any specific speaker. So let's do the rule. Who decide to answer first that he or she gets it, and we are open for. And there's no restriction on that. No, so like open borders for questions for answers basically. Well, it comes to questions that we made some choices because there were so many of them. But let's not waste time and let's start. So Christopher Mael asks, would you support the existence of private gated communities with restrictions on immigrants? If nobody says that, I will choose the answering person. Brian wants to take it. Okay, go Brian.
How do we say? Yeah, my answer is I support the right, but it wouldn't exist. It's just not the kind of thing there's demand for, except in very extreme cases. You can see that in, if you have a shopping mall, you could have a dress code. You could have all kinds of rules in order to go and get your better class of clientele. But almost no business wants to do that because you're turning away paying customers. Someone has to be ridiculous before you actually want to go and keep them out. So this is really the defense of a right, which I think you have, but would just not be exercised to any noticeable degree. So that's my point.
Thank you.
Right. I mean, think about this. You could do criminal background checks at the mall, but who bothers?
Yes. Per, would you like to add something? Go, Per.
Yeah, it's a little strange the way the question is phrased. When you're talking about immigration to private gated communities, then you're really saying that the owner of that area, that community, restricts who can buy. Well, if there is enough demand, maybe you can do that. If you have 100 people wanting to buy 25 houses in your gated community, then maybe you can restrict it. Of course, you're going to choose not necessarily who pays the highest price, but also based on some other arbitrary preference. But such a gated community, if there is not enough demand to live there, if there's not basically excess demand, then you're going to have a lot of empty houses. So there's always, such restrictions are always a cost on whoever is the owner. I don't see, anyone can of course restrict who enters their property and things like that. But if you're selling houses that you built, you probably want to sell them as soon as possible. So I'm not against the idea, but I don't think, much like Brian said, that there's not much of a benefit in the market probably.
Thank you. Let's go next. Bria Lindsay, she asks, interesting talk. My question is, are there any indicators that can be used to determine whether migration has become a security risk? Brian?
So first thing, is immigration a security risk? And my answer is, of course, because everything is a security risk. If all you're doing when you're looking at any possibility is saying, is there a risk at all, then you'll wind up saying no to everything. This is what we saw during COVID. Well, is it a risk for someone to go and walk around outside? Yeah, it's a risk. It's a really, really small risk. But if you use this kind of standard of does a risk exist at all, then yeah, of course, that is the end of human freedom entirely, because everything people do is risky. Is it an important risk? That's where I say, not only is there no sign of that, but there's overwhelming sign that is not the case. So of course, the main thing people think about is terrorism. When you stop watching the horrible stories on TV and look at statistics, you realize terrorism is a very tiny problem. The main issue with terrorism is not the terrorism itself, it's the response. That is, of course, the goal of terrorism is to provoke an hysterical overreaction to what is, in the broad scheme of things, a small action, right? It's one where if you just look at so in the United States, the biggest victim of terrorism in the first world, we can see, well, murder is less than 1% of all deaths. Terrorism is less than 1 of all murders, and yet we spend billions of dollars to deal with it. In terms of indicators, of course, every story that you see about an immigrant doing anything bad, you can say that's an indicator. It's just about if you think of it not as, is there any problem whatsoever in the universe, but rather in the broad scheme of things compared to other risks, is this a serious risk? Then I'd say, no, I don't see that. In fact, I see that is not something that people should be worrying about. People really need to calm down and focus on statistics rather than scary stories. Of course, the media's main job is to get people to not look at statistics and only focus on scary stories, which I think why we have such a ridiculous reaction to these very minor risks.
Thank you. Next, we have a question that is directed to Per. Per, this is a question from Luis Pedro Santis Fuentes. Per, what was the most difficult for you when you left your country?
Wow, that's a good question. I think that, well, yeah, that's a very good question, actually. I mean, there were plenty of policies, and the uncertainty of not knowing the outcome of all these government policies and government processes that I had to wait for and pay for and everything like that, that was a big burden. I mean, but for me personally, it was probably learning the culture and fitting in, and or at least try to fit in. Maybe I shouldn't say that I have fit in perfectly, but I mean, there are so many different dimensions to it. What's that?
No one does. No one fits in perfectly.
Right. We're all unique and we're all a little bit weird, I guess. But I mean, learning because there are these nuances in culture that when you're born and raised in a culture, you pick up on them easily and you don't even recognize that they're there. But as a foreigner, it becomes really hard to interpret, especially from the beginning. You have no clue what that means, or do they mean that, what they're actually saying, and why are they doing it this way, and things like that. Even though the cultural difference between two Western countries, as in my case, they're not enormous, and I already knew the language, but still there are so many things that you have to learn to pick up on in order to function very smoothly in the society. So you have to be very humble and willing to learn. But of course, the main problem from the beginning was all the paperwork, and then for many years the uncertainty of whether I would be able to stay, and what the cost would be and things like that. Of course, if I could just have avoided that and just take my things and moved wherever I wanted, then that would be awesome. But it was a many years long process with lots of uncertainty.
Thank you. Ken Schoolen, Vice President of Liberty International, and also research in the field of immigration, big admirer of open, unrestricted immigration, is with us. I'm very, very happy. He sent a question. What studies exist to show openness to migration and economic development? Why is migration missing from Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom of the World Index and the similar index by Heritage Foundation? We don't have a representatives of neither Fraser nor Heritage with us, but maybe any of you would like to comment on this, respond. Bryan?
I mean, with Heritage, I think the answer is obvious. Heritage is anti-immigration, so they don't want to acknowledge that freedom of immigration has anything to do with economic freedom or human freedom. The Fraser Institute, I think it is more of an oversight. When the components of the index were figured out, immigration was not as big an issue, and people just forgot about it. And then once you have forgotten about it, it's a lot of work to go and redo it. I think it should be redone, but I don't think that's a reflection of anything more than just neglect. But for Heritage, yeah, like obviously they have an ideological reason not to include it.
Thank you, Per.
So I can just add that this is an opportunity, right? Because since neither of these indices actually have migration in them, and because there are basically open borders into this space, we could produce this index.
Yes, so it is we found a niche in some way. That is positive. Zindi Anthony Levy asks, right to movement is fundamental human right. Then what is your position on international political system depriving that to world citizen at the same time promoting other fundamental human rights? Why do they promote other human rights and not migration, Bryan?
I'd say the international political system has a very conventional social democratic view of what human rights are. So, for example, they will get extremely upset about someone who's clearly guilty of murder not getting a proper judicial procedure, or they'll get way more worried about someone getting executed for 10 murders they confess to than they are about innocent people being stuck in a country that they don't want to live in. And basically, what they're doing is they start with a very conventional view. They assume they're right. They don't argue, and they talk to each other, and that's how it goes, right? It's not like they're sitting around reading political philosophers and then saying, "Oh, which one's right?" and like, "What are the arguments?" It's one where they just start with what is already common opinion among human rights elite, so-called, and then they move forward as if they've got it all figured out, even though they barely think about it. So yeah, they're not real intellectuals, and they're not the kind of people that would question the consensus they've already got. They just go and try pushing it, and of course, on top of that, like most people, they're not very concerned about consistency. Again, if you ever go and read like the Geneva Convention or the Hague Convention, and you say, seems like the countries that pretend like they actually care about this break a lot of these rules all the time. What's going on? And the answer is, yeah, well, it's not really about being consistent. It's about what you can get away with, honestly.
Thank you. Yes, Per?
Well, could I add also that what I mentioned in my little my few remarks earlier, that if there are open borders, that undermines the power of politicians too, right? If people can choose the policy where they want to live, and they can actually just pack their bags and leave whenever the policies are some whatever they don't like with them, that limits the power of politicians and what politicians can do, which is of course a problem. So there was a reason why you couldn't move out of the Soviet bloc, for instance, and move from East Germany to West Germany. And the reason is simple. They wanted to keep people there. And of course, if people could choose, well, most of them would probably not stay in East Germany and the sort of communism they had there, and instead move to West Germany or to some other country. So depending on your policies and what you want to do to people, which is how I see policy, you need to keep people in and keep people in place. It also facilitates sort of central planning, which is something politicians are also involved in.
Thank you. There is a
Can I do a
question
follow-up
from
on that?
Luis.
Can I do a follow-up on that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Bryan, please add.
Striking is, so Per's right. The very worst countries in the world try to prevent immigration because they don't want to rule over an empty country. But at the same time, also the countries that are by most measures the best want to prevent immigration because they don't want a lot of people to move there. There's two very different ideological rationalizations of these policies. So usually the countries that want to stop you from leaving are Marxist-Leninist countries, where they want to say, well, like it's counter-revolutionary to move, or alternately, they might say, look, the state gave you everything you have. You're not, you can't just go and walk away with the education that we provided for you. But on the other hand, in the West, it is this ideology of international Western rights. And the story is just that they don't consider the right of migration to be an important one. Sort of the only thing you've got under Western human rights law is this right of asylum, right, where they very clearly say, look, it's not, we're not, economic refugees don't count. All that matters is political repression. And again, as to where they get these weird lines, it's just from their consensus they've had for a long time, combined with their gut sense of, we don't want to have a lot of immigration, right? And
Yes.
Where does that come
yes,
from?
even in my country, in Poland, in Poland, the debate, at least a few years ago, before the war in Ukraine escalated was that if the refugees come for a humanitarian reason, that's fine, we can have them. But if they come for economic reasons, just to have better life and better job, then stop it. And I thought, like, wow, that's amazing. Why the idea of having better life is such a bad idea for this, politicians and ultimately a lot of population who support this. To me, the work migration is best migration, because this migrant will actually take care of himself, add to society in various ways. Yet the political elite and the big media think exactly opposite. For them, the migration where the government gives money to some people in some closed camps sometimes, it's okay, we need to do this, while the economic one, that one is not welcome. I hope this will be changing, and I hope our work, this index, will contribute. Very interesting question from Marina, our very dear friend from United Kingdom. She likes our talks, and she asks, can nations with welfare states legitimately discourage/prevent migrants from accepting benefits to deter migrants who wish to take advantage of the system? Very important question for every libertarian, every free marketeer, I think. Who will take it? Per will take it.
I will try. I mean, I don't see a reason why policymakers can't make that rule. I mean, you can say that, well, the first 5 years, no one will take care of you. We will not give you money or give you benefits or whatever. It's perfectly a possibility. Policymakers can just make it happen. I mean, the better way would probably be to also say that, well, none of the regulations apply to you. So you're basically in a stateless situation. So we will not give you any benefits, but we will also not burden you with any problems. And I know some of the United States, some of the states have that policy for startups. Of course, that's not migration, but for some startups, that if you start a new business for the first X years, none of the regulations apply to you, so you have a chance to start and grow the business, and then, of course, they will implement or enforce these regulations onto that business. So it's still very limiting, of course, but you could do something similar with migrants. And of course, the welfare state, I mean, the better thing would be to just pull the plug on it completely. But you can, of course, say that, well, that doesn't have to be general, and most welfare states aren't general to begin with anyway. They're general with respect to citizens, but all benefits do not apply to all citizens. So you can say that, well, for this time period, you don't get anything, or you have to be a citizen for X number of years before you get anything. But these are policy questions
Yes.
I mean, it depends on the policy situation in every country.
Yes, I heard that proposition sometime at some conference, that new immigrants would not take social benefits for X years, 5 years or something, and perhaps that would stimulate rather the working migration. I very much wonder what Bryan Caplan thinks about it. I'm sorry for finger pointing, but Bryan, would you tell us, what's your take on that kind of public policy? Let's imagine the libertarian option is not on the table, and welfare state tomorrow, but we have other kind of grayish options. Would you be rather for 5 years of no welfare benefits for fresh migrants, and then after 5 years maybe they can enjoy whatever, or something like Per proposed that maybe they pay less taxes same time? What do you think? What's your take on it?
Honestly, I would say that the best thing to do is whatever will give the strongest support for immigration. So if it's really true that if you can tell people, look, they will never get benefits, and that's totally clear, and that's open policy, and if this would actually change people's minds, then I think that is the thing to focus on. The gains of immigration are so great that whatever you have to do to get to get to yes, to get a green light to come. Yes, this is my shirt here. Whatever it takes to get to a green light is totally worth doing. And again, honestly, I would say, even if you are a big supporter of the welfare state, just to say, look, if we make an exception, if this gets more people in, still, this is an exception that's totally worth making. If you're skeptical about the welfare state to begin with, then I think it's even more of a no-brainer. In terms of whether it's a good idea to say, fine, no benefits, but also no taxes, if you could get that, it's great. I mean, I think that's just going to make people highly resistant to immigration. If you say, well, they're making exceptions for them. If you were just say, look, all these complaints are definitely wrong because they are not eligible for any benefits at all, I think that would probably do a good amount towards reducing support and reducing opposition to immigration. It is notable that the countries on earth with the most open immigration policies of all the Gulf monarchies, they have a very strict limits on government benefits that migrants can receive. So again, if you look at, say, United Arab Emirates, it's like 85% foreign born, right? And basically what's going on is that foreigners don't get any of the oil money. It's not a perfect system, obviously, but by making these adjustments, it does seem like you're able to greatly reduce resistance to immigration. So I'd say, anything that we can do along those lines is almost certainly worth doing.
Thank you. There's a question to our friends from Ukraine, from Luis. When do you think migration will begin in Ukraine? Maybe we can add something more. Do you think Ukraine is assuming the war is over and we have the regulatory state as we have it? Do you think Ukraine is ready for migration at this point, or will be ready?
Yeah, hello. Thank you for a great question. I would say that we had an influx of migrants from all over the world before the war. Right now, what we see that we can discuss about migration, we have physical migration. We also have migration of people who can work in IT services that doesn't require migrating to Ukraine physically, but people can work, for example, remotely from any part of the world. And we see that right now, given the situation that's happening in Ukraine, IT companies are successful in attracting foreign talents who can continue working remotely. At the same time, as Dmytro said, once we get all necessary security guarantees, given favorable regulatory environment, definitely we expect that after that time, we will see migrants who will be coming to Ukraine working in different industries. And I guess the primary interest would be industries related to reconstruction of Ukraine. I guess that industries will see huge demand for foreign workers. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And we're keeping our fingers. Again, I say that for future of freedom in Ukraine and obviously peace in Ukraine. We are already outside the time frame that we proposed for this live show. So I propose the last question. And I don't know if Kateryna from Toronto is still with us. So I don't see the miniature of her video. So I will ask a question. If Kateryna is here, she will take it. If not, then some of you can take it because it may be seen beyond Canada. This is a question from Himanshu, who is from India. He says, Canada requires successful cultural integration. Why is that even important? My home country, and this is India, never questioned it. Was it presumed based on birth? And in another question, Himanshu asked about Germany, that where people are more and more people are not happy with immigrants who are not culturally integrated. So, and he asked to what extent that is important. So we don't need to focus on Canada only. Germany has this issue. So the cultural integration, is this even important? Should it inform policy? If Kateryna is here, she can comment on Canada. If she's not, then any of you, please comment on the cultural issue. Yes, Bryan?
It's obviously important to people in receiving countries. I think that they greatly overestimate how important it really is. I mean, like I said, you could have an illiterate Afghan goat herder gets off a plane, and in a week he is a productive member of society, washing dishes in an Afghan restaurant. But obviously, most people feel very differently. And especially, they vote differently. Most people are much more comfortable with culturally similar immigration. That's just a fact. So, I mean, one thing you can do is try to change their minds and say, "Can't you be more flexible? What's the big deal?" I think there's some value in that. I think there's also some value in encouraging people. Well, if you are going to a country, like it is a good idea to go and try to learn the language and otherwise at least be open to changes. So I think that's worthwhile too. I mean, this is one where obviously the fact that people are moving from one country to another country suggests that there's something that is better about the country you're going to. So it's one where it's at least reasonable to say, well, what might those things be? What can I learn? But yeah, I mean, in terms of whether I think this should be the basis for whether immigrants are allowed in or not, then definitely not. But that's the harsh reality, is that people do care.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bryan. And as I mentioned, we will be closing today's panel. I'm very happy about how it went. I want to thank all of our participants, Dr. Tom Palmer joining us from Thailand. Same time, I want to thank the sponsor of this research project, International Work Migration Index, Atlas Network. And the same time, I want to say that we aim, Liberty International, to continue this project. This was just a pilot with 3 countries. We have a lot of work to do. We want to research more and more countries. This is a work for years. When it will be completed index at some point, because this is something really crucial. It is not just a research, not a scientific thing. It is a tool for individuals, that a real tool they can use to help them to make better informed decisions about their future. And that's super important part of our work. And I want to thank Atlas, and we very much hope Atlas will continue supporting us on this path. But obviously, this is the future. I want to thank Bryan Caplan. Bryan, thanks a lot for your insights, for your presentation, your comments. We wish to be in touch with you in the future, because who is better ally here? Thank you so much for your time.
All right.
Per, thank you.
Keep up the good work, everybody.
Thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Per, for mentoring this project, for your insights, your personal stories as well, as you are a migrant. And Kate Shapovalenko, Dmytro Lyvch, also second Kate, all our Ukrainian friends, allies, partners, for the hard work, most importantly, very hard work they did for this project. And we wish to collaborate. And obviously, we wish all the best to Ukraine, as it was mentioned. Finally, I want to thank participants, people who followed us in this show on YouTube, on Facebook, LinkedIn. I hope I have not missed any social medias. Please do follow us, Liberty International, on all these social medias. We are also present on Twitter, so YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram as well. There are so many of them, but they are important. Please be with us, follow our projects. We hope to see you not just online, but also in person. There will be opportunities in Madrid in the summer, in Phoenix, Arizona in the fall. Who can apply, please do. Thank you so much for staying with us for Liberty International. And I wish you a great end of Sunday. Have a fantastic weekend to come. All the best. Thank you. Goodbye.